This week, Thomas Fisher from Digital Guardian joins us for the show. Elusive Networks has a new product announcement. RSA NetWitness SIM Suite gets an update. Guardicore Labs will be presenting at Black Hat about breaking through some VMware virtualization products. What else? Google OAuth application whitelisting, which I thought was very interesting. EdgeWave, company I've never heard of before, in the news twice. Some interesting stuff going on there. Some partnerships, CrowdStrike, ProtectWise. Minerva also has an announcement. StackRox actually came out of the not the closet, but they came out of stealth mode with some new container security products that we'll talk about. The interview with Thomas will focus probably on GDPR, is what we discussed before. Then we'll talk about monitoring infrastructure with Nagios or not Nagios, and some tips on planning for what you want to get out of your infrastructure monitoring. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. The teleprompter now has artificial intelligence, Doug, and updates itself. It's awesome. This week, and talk about them as it relates to enterprise security. You're going to do great. we're gonna
I think that people think that you and I talk like every day at night. You know, It's like, hey, what are you doing? It's kind of a bit of an exhausting week. And I think that we noticed that a little bit in the stories for this week as well.
IT Pro TV is the resource to keep you and your IT team's skills up to date. IT Pro TV's team solution provides group pricing and access to their supervisor portal. You'll gain full control over your team's training schedule, see individual and group analytics, and more. IT Pro TV does IT live every day, so you know you're getting the most current IT training. Go to itpro.tv/enterprise security and use the code ES30 to try it free for 7 days and receive 30% off your monthly membership for the lifetime of your active subscription. To learn more about IT Pro TV's team solution, sign up for a free demo of their supervisor portal. Are you worried about PCI compliance? Does your development team understand or care about security? Are you ready to face a breach of your customer sensitive data? See the worst that can happen before it does. Black Hills Information Security can help you help management see the future. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a web application penetration test can mitigate the risk before you go live. Welcome, everyone, to episode 54 of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is July 18th, 2017. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, joined here in studio by Thomas Fisher. Welcome.
Thank you.
It's nice to have you. Yeah, you're like great. All the way from over the pond.
Yeah, over the pond, yeah.
That's awesome.
It's my yearly trip over to the US to...
Very nice. Oh, so you're staying and then just going from here right to Black Hat?
Yeah. I'm leaving, going over Friday to Black Hat. I was here last week as well, business...
Nice
activities, but it's nice
spending some time in the States.
Spending some time in the States, yep.
It's wonderful. On the lines via Skype, Mr. John Strand is here with us. What's going on, John?
Hey, I'm very happy to be here. A little bit bummed I'm not going to be at Black Hat and RSA this year, but we'll definitely be back next year for sure.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting.
Now, where are you going to be, Paul? Because you're going to be there. So, do you have any idea where you're going to be hanging out yet?
Yes, we have a full schedule apparently now that Sam, our producer, has put together for us. Full schedule, fully packed. I had to take some things out. I'm like, we need to be able to go to dinner and eat and stuff.
I know what you mean.
Yeah. So we're meeting with lots of different vendors. We're going to get some briefings. We're going to do some footage, primarily in the Black Hat Business Hall is where we'll be for Black Hat. I don't even think there's time for me to attend a talk, which is kind of a shame, but it'll be fun. Then from there we'll be at DEF CON, and we'll be selling shirts and glasses and all kinds of Security Weekly swag out at DEF CON. So nice. It's gonna be awesome. It's gonna be awesome. I can't wait. We actually have more people helping us to do interviews and stuff at Black Hat. So we'll hopefully we're gonna hit a lot of the vendors we talk about on the show, which will be fun. And we'll go to some parties.
Yeah.
We'll crash some parties.
Definitely.
Absolutely. So a quick announcement, itpro.tv/enterprise security. Use the code ES30 and try it for free for 7 days. Receive 30% off your monthly membership for the lifetime of your active subscription. IT Pro TV's got a new team solution for enterprises. Learn more and sign up for a demo of their supervisor portal. Alrighty, on to the enterprise security news for this week. Elusive Networks launches external incident application programming interface. This, to me, speaks of Elusive Networks throwing their hat in the ring to be the vendor that collects all of the information pertinent to security incidents and does analytics, big data, machine learning, artificial intelligence on that and provides you with the console so you can say, yep, that machine's hacked, and yep, that's how it got hacked, and yep, that's the vulnerability they used.
Yeah, I still would love to see someone somewhere show me how all this stuff happens automatically, because it still seems to me like you have to have a pretty good understanding of your network as well. So I don't know. It's like we were talking about it before the show. We see a lot of these vendors that come out with these products. We do a lot of penetration tests for organizations. We just don't see these products, or at least these products don't seem to be factoring into our tests. So I'm very, very confused. It'd be great if someone wants to shoot us an email and say, yes, we've got one of these single pane of glass products, and it works fantastic.
But John, they have an API, and it works in real time. I mean,
is it an AI API, Paul?
No, they just say it is an API. They do say that it does work in real time, and it integrates with prevention and detection technologies.
So basically, you're feeding everything into their product.
Yes.
And then something will pop out.
Yes.
So,
like lateral movement. They can detect lateral movement throughout the network.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, if you go, I think you mentioned machine learning in this aspect, right? But I've actually been testing some of the machine learning products that are out there because we're trying to integrate some of it into what we do. And there's a big problem with machine learning. Half of it is actually trending. And you can do trending without actually having machine learning.
Or it's if statements. Did you see the little cartoon strip where the guys are interacting with the robot and the salesperson's like, this is an artificially intelligent robot. And they like push it and it falls open and there's a bunch of like little cards with ifs on them that fall out. That was great. I forgot, someone on Twitter or Facebook sent that to me. It was awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that's what you're experiencing essentially.
That's what I've seen is that there are some products out there that are focused on machine learning that are actually taking the next step. So they're trying to do something intelligent and understand what's going on in the network. But it all comes back down to how you're baselining your environment. If you don't baseline your environment correctly, it doesn't work that well. And what I've found is that a lot of it is a trend, right? So by trend, I mean it's looking at all the events that are happening and that are coming in, and then on top of that, they look, oh, this one is not an event I haven't seen in like a long time, so I'm going to flag it as potentially an anomaly. But then you have to go in and tell it, no, it's not an anomaly, or yes, it's an anomaly, so it can learn. So before that pane of glass is actually working effectively, you're spending more time teaching the damn thing than you are actually using it.
Kind of like a SIM, like NetWitness.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how the large SIM vendors, and John, I thought you'd like this one, and we've kind of talked about this in the past, how the large SIM vendors are making their products do what a lot of these smaller companies are doing with the so-called machine learning and having a focus on security like they've always tried to have, I think. But basically the big news with this one is they improved their interface. And I think this is the problem when you have a product of this size that's been on the market for this long is you got to make sense of all of those features and capabilities you put in it, so you got to redo your interface a lot.
They're a little bit behind.
Yeah.
Because QRadar they've upped their interface game.
Yep.
ArcSight have upped their interface game recently as well. And I spent half my, I won't say half. A few months ago, I was spending half my time trying to integrate our product into SIMS. And at the end of the day, it's what you make of the data, right? It's what you're going to build in terms of workspaces, or what you're building in terms of actual views that you're actually going to look at the data. What I found is actually there's some really cool guys that are actually building on top of that and adding more intelligent integration. So I saw one guy back in London a few weeks ago. He's actually building workspaces where he's integrating things like some of the threat intelligence coming out of things like recorded futures.
Yes.
So he's building that in so that when he sees an IP address that's been potentially flagged by that, he's actually highlighting that IP address. And he's gone down to the point where he's actually, if there's chatter about a certain document that's being seen on the on the dark web or things like that, he's actually trying to highlight that document if it exists in some of your alerts in the SIM. Mm-hmm. And that's where SIM becomes useful and becomes to a certain extent a little bit more interesting for at least for an enterprise, because you get that visibility on that, what's more important to you, right? It's not just a bunch of events that you're trying to scroll through.
John, comments on that? John is very sharp contrast view, I think, to threat intelligence.
Well, I think threat intelligence is absolute garbage. I think dark web monitoring is absolute garbage. I think that the way most SIMs are set up, and I think you'd probably agree, is absolute trash as well. And the main reason for all that, we're going to go through it very, very, very quickly because we've talked about it a lot on the show. Dark web monitoring is crap because they have this idea that if you're talking about Russian hackers or you're talking about nation-state hackers, there's going to be some kind of secret club online, and they're going to walk in and they're going to try to find like some type of smuggler to smuggle them off the planet, and lightsabers will come out, and it's going to be a seedy underworld type cantina joint. And that's not how it works, especially with the very targeted professional attackers. But people believe that, so people buy it. Yeah. And whenever we're talking about threat intelligence, it's pretty much doing a lot of security by looking in a rearview mirror and saying, well, these are the attacks that we've actually seen, and somehow we're going to be able to predict advanced adversaries coming at our network utilizing that information, and that's crap. It's great for detecting your standard botnets or maybe a campaign from a lower level attacker, but a targeted determined attacker is going to do that. And then with SIMs, Paul pulls me into this. I was going to stay quiet, Paul, but with SIMs, like we're watching way too much. With SIMs, we're watching way more than we actually should be, instead of actually focusing in on the things that matter with an attack. So that's one of the problems I have with a lot of these products that are coming on. It seems like what they're doing is a lot of the people that make the determination as far as sales are looking at all the buzzwords that exist today. And they're like, we need to have a product that does a single pane of glass. It uses artificial intelligence. It has an AI. It's using CASB. And they send it off to developers. And developers are like, what the hell is this crap? Yeah, we need something with all of that in it, because that's what people are looking for. And it's a lot of garbage, in my opinion.
I kind of agree with you, John. I mean, when I talk to some of the customers that I talk to, I'm always like, are you actually focusing what's critical for you? I mean, is your SIM actually able to highlight something that's like part of your critical assets? Because I work a lot in data protection, right? So the first thing I ask them is, are you actually monitoring the data that's most critical to you?
More importantly, do you know what the data is most critical?
That's a different question.
That's where it lives and who owns it.
That's a completely different question.
Usually one which people don't have the answer to, which is kind of concerning. I do want to kind of segue into somewhat kind of our next story, which ties into threat intelligence. So one of the things that I've seen threat intelligence be effective is part of what Domain Tools is a sponsor of the show, just full disclosure. But there are other vendors that do it. Some of them actually rely on the Domain Tools feed. However, if there's a domain that's part of a phishing campaign, what they'll do is they'll look and see characteristics of who registered that domain, and then blacklist all of the other domains. Because typically, if that domain is bad, then they registered it because they're lazy with the same information. You can kind of predict that all these other domains are bad, and you can prevent future attacks. I think that's cool. I think that's useful. The other thing is how you actually block those. I was speaking with someone that was like, well, what's the best way to utilize threat protection and actually block things? And one of my suggestions, which kind of speaks to where we're at in vendor world, I'm like, dude, you just use like DNS and like open source. Like that's how I would do it. Like DNS blacklisting, provided you have reliable sources, I think is great. And it's something that you can do without buying a really expensive product. I do it with open source products, and it's in the cloud on really small droplets in DigitalOcean, and like it works fine. And if you were to combine that, I mean, you don't need to get fancy and put it on your firewalls and your endpoint protection. Like, just block it in DNS.
Yeah, I mean, there's that point. And my perspective is that if it's not right in your face, and I mean, like that's what I like. What sometimes Chrome does when it's hitting a known bad domain, it'll actually block it for you, right? And it'll tell you you can't go, you shouldn't go there because it's bad,
right?
Whatever. I mean, if they integrated some of that technology into Chrome as well, you get to a certain point where it'd be a little bit easier for the typical everyday user. But an additional product on top of an additional product, I don't know. I mean, there's so many products out there now that just like it's one after the other, and are they really helping the user?
They're all following each other. Right. They're all doing the exact same thing. It's like, oh my God, Rapid7 just talked about, whatever, machine learning and DNS. It's like, we got to have that too. And we've seen that on the show. It's been interesting over the past year or so, Paul, how we see that very, very, very regularly. Once we see one vendor talk about something in a press release, everybody else has to do the same thing. And I'm just waiting for one vendor to create something complete gibberish and put it out there in a press release and start seeing if other vendors start saying that they're doing the exact same thing. It's like, Aquaflux hydrodynamics is now in part of our product. And everyone's like, well, we've got hydroflex hydrodynamics too. We'll have that. We got a pane of glass, a single pane of glass for that. Just to see if people catch up with it.
I mean, we just had that, right, a couple of months ago with the famous ransomware. And, to the point of you blocking every DNS, that would have been a bad thing in that case.
Because people wouldn't be able to pay the ransom.
No, because the ransomware would have triggered. The whole thing with WannaCry is that DNS was actually a dead key. So if it detected the DNS and could connect to it, it would actually stop, right? So if you actually block that DNS, you'd be actually backfiring on yourself, and you'd create a whole bit. You just let the ransomware spread throughout your environment. And I'm wondering if we're actually going to see more of that, right? So if you actually block something, that might become a trigger for that piece of malware, or that piece of whatever, to actually propagate and trigger off, because they're no longer, they've lost control. So they're going to say, "Oh, I've lost control, so bye-bye, your machine's hosed."
Right. That's a good point. My point on that was, Malwarebytes has this adware cleaner, and my whole thing is to prevent that from getting on the system in the first place using DNS blocking. However, I think endpoint technology still needs to be in play. And speaking of that, Minerva and my good friend Lenny Zeltzer and others at Minerva Labs, who are awesome people, Eddie Berbitsky is the founder. And we've had them on the show. Their technology is just awesome. They've added the capability to do macro blocking and something else into their product. And the macro blocking is kind of neat in the way that they do it, right? Because they're not relying on some kind of software policy to disable macros, because as we all know, users just enable them. They're just telling the malware as part of a deception technology that macros are always disabled. It's pretty cool. But this is a creative, neat approach, right? I went through this entire thing and talked to Lenny about it, and it's neat whenever we see a vendor that's trying to do something that's pretty unique and just kind of cool. So hopefully this works out really well for Lenny and the team. So
if you've talked to them, what do they do with official macros? So, my biggest problem that I've always had is in the past, because I used to be part of IR teams and things like that in large organizations. The first thing when we try to block stuff like this, the first thing that would come up is the finance team would go, "You can't block macros because we need them, because our spreadsheet is 100 megabytes and it needs to run 5,000 macros to actually calculate the budget for next year."
And that's pretty typical, right? And that's not just a problem with this particular product. I think that's kind of what you're getting at. And the thing that sucks the most about those macros, and I agree with you 110%, is the people that need those macros are actually the very people that we are targeting. They're the very people that have the most sensitive information. They're the people that have the money. And that's where we want to go. So you will always have that problem in that people are using those macros and having to have them enabled. It's still going to be there.
It's when the macro launches a script interpreter or PowerShell that Minerva Labs steps in and says, no macros are enabled. So macros run, and based on the behavior, Minerva will feed them false information. And that's how it works with malware, too. If malware does something like try to detect if there's some kind of protection on the system, or if it's in a VM, when it launches those system calls, Minerva kicks in and tells it, yes, that's here, so it thinks protection's enabled. And
so I'm assuming they're whitelisting DDE. Because, enterprises use DDE to connect to back-end data stores.
I'm not sure it's a question.
I was going to say that,
Go ahead,
what I think what this boils down to, gentlemen, is if anybody in your accounting department is starting to Google how to do PowerShell scripting, it's time to be very afraid.
Yeah. This is true. Or if they're Googling how to create my first PHP app, that's probably something bad too. EdgeWave has some interesting products. So they're an email and phishing security company. They've got two different announcements here. They've got some kind of like security awareness type aspect to their product that can train people how not to fall victim to phishing attacks. There's a lot of, it's a really crowded space. Security awareness and particularly phishing defenses, as it's like one of the most popular ways in which organizations are getting owned. I'm curious to see how they stand out from the pack. They also provide a much needed advanced protection and backup for Office 365 users, which I always thought was kind of interesting why Microsoft doesn't do that themselves, but a lot of these other vendors are coming along and tacking on security services to Office 365, including email and file sharing as well.
That's what they did.
They do provide some level, but the vendors
I think
go.
the assumption for a lot of people is that Microsoft sucks at it.
Yes.
And I think that's why a lot of these people are moving into the space. I don't know if that assumption is correct, but it is definitely an assumption that we don't need to use Microsoft security products. We need to go buy something else. Right, wrong, or indifferent. That's the impression that I get from a lot of our customers.
There was a chart somewhere, and I don't know if it was that story or somewhere else. Maybe it was this first one. No, where was it? There was a chart of like someone that provided this kind of cloud services, and it was like, here's what's provided by the cloud service provider, and then it's like we tack on these extra things, right? So it was the ability to drill down into user and group behavior within the file sharing subsystem. The vendor doesn't provide that. Google and Microsoft natively don't provide that, but these other services do. And then it was Cloud Watch. Is that story in there? Did I not add that one in there?
Which one?
I might not have added it in there. It was Cloud Watch. It must have gotten lost somewhere. It was some cloud security company. But the other thing that they provide is, well, not only can you do that in Google's cloud or Amazon's cloud, but you can also do that in Azure. So these cloud security providers are saying, well, even if some of those security features are natively supported, you want to manage it from a central location and manage users and groups and monitor specific behavior across all of your cloud and SaaS providers. And that's how this whole market of CASBs emerged.
Okay. Is it also microsegmentation or?
Yeah, I don't think we have enough details on it, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure in this particular one.
Something to look up.
Yeah.
So you said CloudWatch, right?
I think it's Cloud. Yeah, I can't believe I didn't put that story in there. I don't know how that. I'll find it in a break or something.
Okay.
Yeah, so Google all the application whitelisting, right? That's a service that doesn't come natively in Google. It's Cloud Lock. No, it's this story. Sorry, I clicked the wrong link. Yeah, see, it's Cloud Lock, right? So group level access controls, user level application security ratings, crowdsource application security scores, and support of other cloud providers. So it is in there. It's Cloud Lock. Basically, in response to the recent OAuth phishing attack, they provide some enhanced controls so that you can see what OAuth applications you have and apply some more advanced security rules to them. This
is freaking awesome.
Yeah, it's actually pretty cool,
This has been something that we've been needing for a really long time.
Mm-hmm. So there's been some partnerships that were announced. Logically, I think they make sense. So here are the two that I want to talk about: CrowdStrike and Dragos. So we all know CrowdStrike, right? They catch bad guys, like they find the bad people. How would you describe CrowdStrike, John?
I like how CrowdStrike described CrowdStrike when they first came out. They're like, Mandiant? Yeah, we pretty much do what they do. Now, they came out with some products, of course, and there's definitely differentiation now. But yeah, they're in that kind of services space, incident response,
endpoint
forensics.
Protection.
Yeah.
Yep, and then endpoint protection as well.
Right. So they partnered with an industrial control systems expert, which is Dragos, to do some of this sort of like threat hunting that CrowdStrike does, but apply that to ICS. So I thought that was probably I think that's a really good partnership.
I do too. Normally I'd kind of blow it off, but I know that Rob Emley, or as we like to call him, Mini Rob, is fantastic. Dragos is an awesome company. If you're doing any ICS at all, you need to call them and work with them. They're just really, really, really good at what they do. Very competent. So it's a cool partnership.
ProtectWise and Ixia have announced an integration partnership. I mean, and this is logical, makes logical sense, right? ProtectWise takes all of your network traffic and does the analysis. It shovels it up into the cloud and lets you analyze it and do the replay thing, so you can replay any kind of stream. Ixia, of course, is the company that collects all of that traffic, both in the cloud and on-premise. So it's pretty logical that they'll have a partnership. I thought that was a good thing too. What I'd like to see from ProtectWise, as we've learned, is to be able to do some of that stuff on premise, as a lot of these cloud providers, and this was the one that was just kind of a shining example, when you're shoveling that much data back and forth to the cloud, like there's a lot of cost to that. People are like, oh, well, cloud, we'll save some money. I'm like, no, depends on what you're doing. You're paying for data in, data out, CPU and storage. So yeah, you gotta take that.
Especially once you start feeding all your data from your enterprise and feeding it up into the cloud, it's like then traffic, the counter starts ding 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 ding.
And they have a patent on getting that network traffic like compression in shoveling that into the cloud. They have a patent on that, but it still amounts to a lot of data. Yeah. I mean, especially for large enterprises. So.
But you're going to have to push as much data as you want if you're going to do the analysis properly, right? So
absolutely, the network doesn't lie, man. I mean, John and I are big believers in that.
Absolutely.
This one, I actually know someone that works here. Actually, I worked with her at Tenwell. Hi, Melinda. They will be on the show on Startup Security Weekly this week, actually, and they're in a crowded market with container security, which of course already includes Twistlock, Aqua Security, Docker, and CoreOS, Capsule 8, New Vector, among others. But they claim to have a way in which to monitor containers for bad behavior. What it was kind of interesting is they liken it to having protection capabilities such as WAFs, endpoint detection and response, and intrusion prevention before containers. I thought applying some of those traditional security technologies and thinking about them in containers is interesting. I don't know if I necessarily would have, put the pieces together for containers, because it's just different when you move into a container world. It's like your connections, you could call it like a network, but it's really like containers talk to each other, and it's kind of weird. You wouldn't necessarily apply a web application firewall or an intrusion prevention system. It's just kind of weird how they're and there's lots of ways to network, and containers can trust each other in a specific way, and you define that trust.
Yeah, but I just feel like we don't understand security vulnerabilities for containers yet. And I know a lot of these people would come out and be like, no, we're the experts in this space. But Paul, we were talking about, using Docker and things like that. And you talk about DigitalOcean just added in all kinds of interesting capabilities for storing data. And then you have Amazon, you have all these different container technologies that are floating around. And I still don't feel like there's a good understanding of the overall attack surface. It almost feels like whenever virtualization came out, there were a ton of vendors that were selling virtualization security products that would basically protect the hypervisor. And it was almost like they were playing on the fear and the lack of understanding of that technology to try to sell a product before we fully understood what the threats and the risks were. So I don't know. I could be wrong on that. It just doesn't necessarily seem like it's necessarily mature yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of like, aren't we just repeating, as John said, virtualization? I mean, we're just going back to saying, what are we doing? What did we do for virtualization? Let's try and do the same thing for Docker containers and things like that. Mm-hmm. But I mean, if you're setting it up right, your Docker's kind of contained in itself, right? And
it's a big if.
It's a big if.
And
that's the problem. So they're trying to manage the if, but if you're not doing it properly there, what's that product actually going to add to that? Right?
Exactly.
I mean, right. You're just going to get an additional shitload of logs that you don't know what to do with.
Or can't do anything about, because like you said, if I do set up my containers correctly and there is some type of attack, like Johnson, we don't really know what those attacks look like. I feel like as we're still trying to figure out how it works, let alone what some of the security implications are. I truly think that there's a lot of wins when it comes to containers because I can define my application and the entire infrastructure that constitutes my application in the beginning, and I can tell it this container, right, talks to this container, and that container talks to this container in this way, expose only certain ports, and only put the software I need on those containers. It is a lighter version of virtualization. In other words, you don't really have a lot of networking control and such inside of a container. That's all done by, controlled by the host. So it does work differently from virtualization.
I mean, I'd be more worried about the orchestrators and some of the stuff that's being developed to actually deploy containers rather than the containers themselves. Because the orchestrator was going to set that security profile on your container, was going to set that networking, it's going to set that association between the different containers. And if the orchestrator fucks up, the containers are basically vulnerable, right? I mean, I'd go back down to one underlying level because it's that underlying level.
They did say they also it's not just containers. I want to say in this article they did say they support security for the orchestrators like Kubernetes. Yeah, can work with both Docker or multiple container orchestration systems, including Kubernetes, which I'm told is kind of a train wreck, to be honest with you, and I haven't gone there yet.
Everybody I know has been using Kubernetes is like banging their heads on the desk. So
yeah. I'm still trying to learn Docker Compose. That's where I'm at right now. And I'm just thankful that the YML format, and I wouldn't call it a language. Is it a language? Not really a language. It's more like XML, but it's YML, is the same in Ansible as it is in Docker Compose. I'm like, great, the syntax is, I think, pretty much the same. There might be slight differences, but it's essentially the same. So I'm like, oh, yeah, right, like colons and dash. I got it. I got
this.
I think that would be a better way to enhance or to make sure that you're not making any mistakes is to have a common language that you can learn once and not have to learn different languages for different products and things like that.
Correct. Yeah, that's what I liked about it. And I know Ansible does have some there's a Docker document on Ansible. So I'm not exactly sure how, what the interaction is, because Compose and I believe Kubernetes are doing similar things to what you would do with, I mean, Ansible is essentially orchestration for your Linux systems or whatever you're doing. So, I haven't delved into that. I just started scratching the surface. Sorry, did I get ash in your shoe?
No, you didn't.
Okay. So it's very interesting. I'm having a lot of fun. Well, sometimes it's fun. Other times it's like banging your head against the wall.
I got to the point where I deployed Docker. Well, I put Docker on my Mac. I started deploying a few containers, and then work got involved. Then work got in the way.
Yeah. I went because I really
that was a year ago.
Yeah, and I really wanted. I actually took a production application and Docker, I hate the word Dockerized it, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I did a production application, which that's why your friends probably bang their head against the wall, because a lot of the information that's out there today is like I put Docker on my laptop and I spin up a few applications and like, hey, this is fun and neat. It's like a totally different story where you're like, no, like I'm deploying this in production. Like, how do I do this? And 7 different blog posts later, and taking bits of information from each of them, you're like, oh, that's how I do that. I get it now.
Yeah.
And then it's funny, you talk to people and you're like, I can't get this to work. I tried following the instructions in this blog post. That blog post from 2 months ago? Yeah. Oh man, everything's changed since then. Don't follow this in that blog post. That's stupid. Jeez, no one told you?
Docker Compose is on version 3.3 now. Like, where you been with 3.2? Like, totally different now.
Why would you do that?
Because
that's pretty much how it rolls. Yeah. Well, I think that rounds out the news. Take a short break, come back, and talk to Thomas about some GDPR and whatever else.
Yeah.
Fits are fancy. How do you say it?
Fits are, yeah.
Tickles are fancy. Tickles are fancy.
I was trying to think of the word. I've been in the US for a week and a half. I can't remember how to speak anymore.
We'll be right back.